So for this video, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite series of all time, Freaks and Geeks. In the summer of 2006, when I was going into 9th grade, my friend Andrew showed me this series on DVD. We watched all 18 episodes throughout that weekend. Aside from this and the Larry Sanders Show, I had seen almost everything that Judd Apatow had produced, and I was already a big fan of most of these actors from so many other projects, and I just instantly loved this series. A year after watching this, Superbad and Pineapple Express came out, and it was like the cast and crew of this show took over the comedy world. Everybody loved them, and they were cranking hit after hit, and I would tell all my friends that you have to watch Freaks and Geeks, and they all told me thank you so much after they finally did. So I'm not sure if this is a review of this series. I kind of just wanted to dive into the world of 1981 McKinley High School in Michigan, even though this show was filmed in California in 1999. I'm going to try my best not to get into the trivia about the show because then we would be here for hours. Instead of talking about every episode, let's talk about the characters. I guess the quote-unquote main characters are brother and sister Sam and Lindsay Weir. Sam has two friends, Neil Schreiber and Bill Haverchuck. And Lindsay is starting to hang out with a new group of friends named Nick, Ken, Daniel, and Kim. They're the Freaks. In 1981, Freaks was a term used for burnouts, losers, and potheads. But let's talk about the Geeks before we get into the Freaks. The Geeks are freshmen and they are really innocent kids. They've never had girlfriends or any other friends. They love Star Wars and Bill Murray movies. They have pretty cool taste in movies. I think that these three characters kind of represent all the creators of the show. These all feel like the kids that one day become writers or stand-up comedians. These are just the years before they knew what they wanted to do in life. I think all three characters have equal amount of screen time and significant moments in the plotline throughout. Bill Haverchuck is kind of a latchkey kid. He lives with a single mom who used to be a stripper, but is getting too old for it, so she spends all of her time waitressing for money. I think one of the most significant moments of the series is when it shows Bill coming home to an empty house, which I'm sure is very normal for him. Then he just makes a grilled cheese and watches Gary Shandling do stand-up on TV. Knowing Judd Apatow, it's obvious that this represents him growing up. I think almost anyone who decides to be an artist can relate to the scene. But the main plotline for Bill is that he's allergic to almost everything and almost dies from eating peanuts put there by his bully Alan. And that's a sad episode, seeing his mother fearing for her child's life. It's pretty heavy how Bill's mom confesses to Mrs. Weir that she was taking all kinds of drugs when she was pregnant with Bill, and she blames herself for his allergies. Then it's really sweet how Mrs. Weir confesses that she dropped Sam on a brick patio when he was a baby to make her feel better. But Bill really gets to shine when his mom starts to date his gym teacher who he hates. I can't really explain why, but Martin Starr just gives such a great performance in this episode. Neil Schreiber is definitely the dorkiest of the group. He can get kind of annoying, but that's his character. The biggest storyline he has is that he finds out his dad is cheating on his mom. He really struggles with this and wants to tell his mom. I think that the best scene out of all this is when his older brother Barry, played by the great actor David Krumbolitz, comes to visit from college, and Neil tells him what's going on, and Barry tells him, yeah, you're right, dad cheats on mom. And Neil tells him, should we tell her? And Barry goes, why? So they can get a divorce, and you can only see dad on the weekends in his new apartment? It's a sad scene because it's a complicated situation. Then Neil finally breaks down and tells his mom, and she tells him that she knows and that they have an arrangement. The thing about this storyline is that Neil's dad seemed like a great guy before all this. I'm not saying he's a monster because he cheats on his wife, but part of growing up is realizing your parents aren't perfect, and sometimes they can be a scumbag. And that's a really sad moment in your childhood, and this storyline really nailed that feeling. Now let's talk about Sam. All the geeks are, like I said, innocent, but Sam is the most childlike. It's obvious he hasn't gone through puberty yet and is kind of scared of girls. He does have a giant crush on the cheerleader Cindy Sanders, and he does date her for an episode, but once they go out, he realizes that they don't have anything in common and breaks up with her. Watching the series now, I was starting to think, is Sam supposed to be gay? Like, he's not sexual at all. Every time Cindy tries to kiss him, he gets very uncomfortable. But like I said, he hasn't gone through puberty yet, and I think that he's just a late bloomer. I can relate to him on some level because like him, I was always the smallest and youngest looking kid of the group. I think he's the shy kid who later realized he should get into comedy and writing. I've heard in an interview with the actor who plays Sam, they asked him what would Sam be doing when he grew up, and he said he would have directed Ghostbusters and Bridesmaids. And those are both movies directed by Paul Feig, who created the series. Now let's talk about the Freaks. It's never confirmed what grade they're in, but I'm pretty sure they're in 11th grade. We'll start with Ken Miller, played by Seth Rogen. There's not too much to say about him. At first he's just kind of the quiet smartass, but a lot of that is because Seth Rogen had never acted a day in his life before this series, so he had to ease into the character. As we get into the episodes, we can see him getting more comfortable. His character is kind of a mystery, which I think is cool because we all had that one friend in school that never really opened up but always hung around. But we do learn that his parents are kind of well off money-wise and that he was raised by his nanny. Ken's biggest storyline in the series is that he gets a girlfriend and everything is great until she tells him she was born with both male and female genital organs. He's pretty freaked out and starts to think that he might be gay because he does really like her. And even though this episode has some serious moments, this is mostly played for comedy. Oh my god, it's so funny when he's looking at the gay and straight porno magazines. Next is Kim Kelly. She's Daniel's on and off again girlfriend. They're always fighting and breaking up. The series definitely starts out with her being a complete unlikable bitch, but by the 4th episode she gets a big story where she takes Lindsay to her house for dinner and we get to meet her very dysfunctional and crazy family. Oh my god, that whole scene is so funny. But when you really think about it, it's kind of sad and scary. My favorite part is that Mike White plays her loser brother who's just sleeping on the couch the entire time. Mike White is one of my favorite writers of all time. But back to Kim Kelly. She is a bitch, but you can't really be surprised by that with the family she grew up in. Everyone grew up around a girl like Kim Kelly. If you can look past her nasty attitude, you can't help but feel sad for her. Now let's talk about Daniel Desario. I think he's the saddest character of the series. I think James Franco took the character and the work the most serious from the other actors because that's just the kind of person that he is. Daniel has a few good things going for him. He's a good looking guy with a car and a girlfriend who has sex with him. And let's be honest, most teenage guys at that age would kill to have those things, but this is most likely the peak of Daniel's life. After this, it's all downhill. We only have one scene with Daniel's family and it's with his mom. She's yelling at him to be late to school so he can go pick up his father's pain pills because she can't leave him alone. He tells her to get his brother to do it and she tells him, "Oh yeah, trust your brother with those pills? Never again." He tells her, "I can't keep being late to school. What do you want me to do, drop out so I can make a whopping $2 an hour?" And she tells him, "You know I wouldn't pass that up." That one and only scene really sums up his home life and it's sad. We learn that he's so terrible at school that he's been held back in school for 2 grades, so he's already 18. There's an episode where Daniel and Kim break up and he has a crush on a punker girl, so he decides to be a punker for an episode. I think this was supposed to be Daniel's big episode, but we truly get to know Daniel when he convinces Lindsay to help him cheat on his math test. And the teacher just knows that Daniel cheated even without any evidence. There's a scene where Daniel tells Lindsay about how they gave the kids a math test in elementary school. They tell him track 1 is for the smart kids, track 2 is for the normal kids, and track 3 is for the dumb kids. And he goes, "Guess what I got? How do you think it feels to be told that you're dumb when you're only 11 years old?" It's a serious scene and you can already see that James Franco was going to be an amazing actor, but then later Daniel repeats the entire monologue to get out of trouble and Lindsay just breaks out laughing. I can really relate to Daniel in this episode. Just like him, I was terrible at school and basically just gave up in middle school. Especially with math. Math is my least favorite thing in the world. I truly hate it. But earlier in this episode, Lindsay tries to tutor Daniel and he just gives up before they even start. I don't think Daniel is stupid, he's just lazy. I was just like Daniel. I hated math but wanted to pass my class to get adults off my back, but I would never study because I was lazy. You can't get good at something if you never really try, and we both never tried for more than a few minutes at a time before we just gave up. I think that Daniel is sincerely a good guy. Honestly, you can see from the very beginning of the series that Daniel is a nice guy and he treats everybody cool. And that really shows in the last episode where he has to be with the geeks in audio video class as a punishment. The geeks don't want him there and he doesn't want to be there, but he's there and he has to do the work. There's a scene where he has to set up the projector for the class and all of his friends are there and he humiliates himself by not knowing what he's doing. But then Sam sees him later that day staying after school studying how to set up the projector. So Sam invites him to play Dungeons and Dragons with them and they all have a great time. Watching the series, I always think Daniel will most likely have the worst future than the rest of the characters, but there is some hope at the end when he's studying the projector that maybe he'll stop being lazy and figure out what he wants to do with his life. I was trying to pick which my favorite character of the series is, and it's a tie between Daniel and Nick Andopoulos. I can relate to every one of these characters on some level, but Nick Andopoulos is the character I was the closest to in high school. Just like Nick, I was a pothead drummer who smothered every girl that I had feelings for. Unlike everyone else in the show, Nick actually has a big dream. He wants to be the next Neil Peart or John Bonham. He wants to be a famous drummer. Throughout the series, there's this back and forth with Nick and Lindsay's romance going on. They go out for an episode, but Lindsay's never really into Nick. I think she does like him, but he's too into her, and that's a turnoff for girls. It's like what Daniel tells him, never let a girl know how much you like them. But I think that Nick and Lindsay would have had a much better chance together if he wasn't constantly getting stoned. And I can relate to all of this. It's sad because Nick is a cool, likable guy who you slowly but surely seen becoming a burnout. I think one of the greatest pieces of writing in the series is when Nick leaves the strict father's house after he sells his drums and Lindsay's father feels bad for him and lets him sleep at their house. And Nick is just laying around listening to music and Mr. Weird tells him, if you really wanted to be a drummer, you would find some sticks and bang on a rock. He says, when I was your age, I had an after-school job and I still managed to keep my grades up. You can't be this easy on yourself, Nick. And Nick doesn't get mad or defensive. He appreciates the advice. And that is great advice. I wish I would have really listened to it in high school instead of smoking so much weed. But even if Nick stayed away from weed for the rest of his life and kept pursuing his dream to be the next greatest drummer, he probably would have failed. And that might sound harsh, but so many people spend their lives trying to be the next giant movie star, rock star drummer, guitar player, or singer, but let's be honest, we could only have a few dozen of those at a time, and the world has billions of people. At best, Nick would most likely be a professional drummer and maybe made a record or two with a mediocre band. But that's still something to be proud of. It's such a sad scene when Nick auditions for a semi-famous band and just does terrible, and he realizes he's never going to be the next John Bonham, and he's heartbroken, and Lindsay sees it and kisses him. And that scene right there is the bittersweet beauty of real life. More than most people will never be what they wanted to be as a teenager, and it sucks, but it's not the end of the world, and hopefully you have a beautiful girl to kiss at the end of the day. But by the last episode, Nick has a new girlfriend who his friends don't like because she's into disco and they think that she's changing Nick, and he is changing by the end of the series, but I think it's for the better. He quits smoking pot and finally has a girlfriend that likes him. And he tells Ken he's been trying for a really long time to get a good girlfriend, and he finally has one. But deep down, he still likes Lindsay, and everyone knows it. And it feels like by the end, Lindsay begins to see that Nick is a catch when he's not stoned and maybe she made a mistake. Now last but not least, let's talk about Lindsay. So the series starts off at a real crossroads in her life. She's just starting to hang out with the quote-unquote freaks, and you can tell that she has a crush on Daniel at first, but quickly realizes that it's serious between him and Kim, and forgets about him in that way, but Lindsay is for the first time in her life rebelling. Prior to this, she's a straight-A student, award-winning mathlete, and perfect daughter. But we find out in the first episode that her grandmother just died, and there's this beautifully sad scene where she talks to Sam about it. It's the only scene in the entire series where they talk about her, but it's placed perfectly in the pilot and needed to be in the series. She tells Sam that she was the only person in the hospital room when her grandmother died. Her grandmother told Lindsay, "I'm dying. I don't want to die and I'm scared." And Lindsay asks her, "Do you see a light or heaven or anything like that?" And her grandmother tells her, "No, I don't see anything." Lindsay tells Sam that her grandmother was a good person her whole life, and that's how she died. It's a heavy scene that really understands and reflects that moment when a big part of your innocence dies. It wasn't until watching the scene now as an adult that I realized how important it was to Lindsay's character. My great-grandmother died in a hospital room a few weeks before I graduated high school, and this scene just hit me in a way that I wasn't ready for. Even though I remembered it, I was finally mature and sober enough to see how strong the scene is. So even though Lindsay never talks about it again, you know that this is probably going through her head every day. It makes sense that she is rebelling and looking for new things in her life. She's going through an existential crisis, but she doesn't go crazy at all with sex or drugs. She only gets stoned one time in the series after she tells Nick that he's an addict, and he calls her out. He tells her, "You don't know everything, Lindsay, and when it comes to pot, you don't know anything." And he makes a good point and she knows it, so she smokes a joint and spends the rest of her day freaking out while babysitting with her friend Millie. And I love Millie. That's such a great scene when they get into what starts out as a deep conversation about life after death and even spirituality, and Millie feels bad for Lindsay because Lindsay tells her that she doesn't believe in God, but is going to change how she thinks and lives after today, but Millie knows that she is just high, and after this she's going to keep living her unfulfilled life. Lindsay befriended the freaks to find something that she couldn't from her parents or the mathletes, but quickly realizes that they're just teenagers just like her who have no idea what they're going to do with their own lives. She loves her friends and thinks that they're funny and good people, but they don't challenge her to be a better person, and that's a big part of being a good friend. I think that's why she becomes a deadhead at the end. I love that the final episode ends with everyone in different places. Nick is sober with a good girlfriend, but there is still a sadness to it because it's not Lindsay. Kim is finally happy without being with Daniel. Daniel's with the geeks but is having fun and learning new things, which makes him feel good, and the geeks finally feel comfortable with being geeks. Even though it ends on a beautiful note, it's always sad watching the last episode, seeing Lindsay drive away to the Dead concert. Sometime in high school I was watching this show and I thought, wow, this is a story about a group of people who are most likely going to fail at everything in their lives. It's about the losers we all know or may even be. And after sitting with the series for all these years, I don't think that all of these characters grow into losers, but most likely some of them do. This series is a comedy, but it's also a drama with a lot of sadness to it. Throughout the series, there's this low-level depression underneath the surface of every episode, which I slowly began to notice and made me appreciate the series even more. The only way comedy works for me is if there's an element of truth to it. And to show the truth, especially in the lives of these teenagers, they have to show the pain. I think a big theme in this series is failure. But throughout failure comes survival, and surviving high school and that period in life itself is a victory. I think that mirrors the creators and cast lives at least for the first few years after this show. Freaks and Geeks was cancelled after only 18 episodes. This was devastating to everyone involved in it, and I'm sure to many fans, but it was especially heartbreaking to Judd Apatow. It brought back feelings of his parents getting divorced and his family falling apart. He felt like he might have ruined some of these kids' lives by taking them out of school to make a show that technically failed. But Judd wasn't going to let NBC win. He thought to himself, they basically told me I can't work with these people anymore, and the casts are not movie or TV star material. Well, everything I work on from now on will involve the writers and directors, and I will always write and find roles for the freaks and geeks. And not only that, I'm going to make these people movie stars, because they're talented, and fuck you NBC for breaking us up. We all know how incredibly successful the cast and crew of this show became, and their work speaks for itself. It took a few years, but in the end, the freaks and the geeks won. There's still a bittersweetness to it though. Yes, everything worked out in the end for the cast and crew, and Paul Feig wrote the last episode knowing that they were getting cancelled, so there is a sad type of ending to it, but I think we all deserved at least one more season. If they had at least one more season, I'd feel so more complete about these characters, and everyone involved just became better at their craft, so you know that the season would be amazing. I mean, this is a long season, it's 18 episodes. Most hour-long series only have 10 to 13 episodes a season. But the beauty of television is that we can dive into this large group of people's lives and follow them for hours, spanning years of their lives. I want to see more of the freaks and the geeks, but I also want to see more of Millie, Alan, Harris, Mr. Rosso, and Gordon Crisp, and so many more of the characters. Those are great characters who we never really got to dive into like the main cast. It gives me that feeling of losing touch with people you kind of knew in high school. It's almost like they're dead. Their story got cut so short and quick that it's sad. I bought the Blu-ray box set a few months ago, and it was difficult for me to watch the series. It reminds me of a girl who broke my heart that I watched it with in high school, and we would have really long conversations about Nick, Lindsay, Sam, and Bill, and we would talk about all the funny parts, but also all the sadness to it. I'm sure that's how the cast and crew watch the show. They love it, but there's a lot of sadness that comes with it. I could keep talking about this series for another few hours, but I'm just going to end this video here. So I'm Jacob from Cinema Junkies. Thanks for watching, keep watching, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and follow me on Instagram, cinemajunkies_. Don't forget the underscore.